The destiny of entire nations can change in a single day. An innocent outing, a glance exchanged between strangers, unthinkable violence. And then, the blood of many stains the earth. The story you're about to hear has remained in the shadows for millennia, rarely told in its entirety. A young woman, the only daughter among 12 brothers, walking alone through the streets of a foreign city. Her name Dinah, Jacob's forgotten daughter. What happened that day in Shechem wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the moment that redefined the path of the 12 tribes of Israel, forever altering the relationship between Jacob's sons and the peoples around them. How many times does a single decision change the course of generations? What happens when family protection transforms into uncontrolled vengeance? And how did a young woman, whose voice was almost completely silenced in scripture, carry the weight of a conflict she didn't create? The answers lie buried in ancient texts, between the lines of a narrative that rarely places the victim at the center of the story. This is the journey of Dinah, the only daughter of Leah and Jacob, briefly mentioned in scripture, but whose fate triggered one of the bloodiest episodes in the book of Genesis. A story of lost innocence, brutal revenge, and the unpredictable consequences that shaped the destiny of an entire people. This story brings a perspective on justice, vengeance, and the value of human life that few know. What happened to Dinah after her brother's revenge? Why is her voice practically absent from the biblical narrative? And what lessons can we draw today from this obscure chapter in the history of the patriarchs? It was a time of transition for Jacob's family. After years of servitude to his uncle Laban, after tense confrontations with his brother Esau, Jacob was finally returning to the land of his ancestors. They traveled as a nomadic clan, moving with their flocks, tents, and belongings across arid landscapes and verdant valleys. The period was approximately 1700 years before our era, in a region that today comprises parts of Israel and Jordan. Jacob's family wasn't small. From his wives Leah and Rachel, and from the handmaids Bilhah and Zilpah, 12 sons were born and a single daughter, Dinah. Imagine growing up as the only girl among 12 brothers, in a culture where the divisions between male and female roles were clearly defined. While her brothers learned to shepherd sheep, negotiate with merchants, and defend the flock from predators, Dinah likely learned feminine traditions from her mothers. Jacob decided to settle temporarily near the city of Shechem, a prosperous Canaanite community. For the first time after a long journey, the family set up camp near an established city. For Dinah, who had grown up in open fields and family tents, Shechem represented a fascinating new world. The busy streets, the colorful markets, the women with their different hairstyles and clothes, all this must have awakened natural curiosity in a young woman who had known only the family environment. The city of Shechem was an important commercial center, situated in a fertile valley between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. Merchant caravans constantly passed through, bringing exotic products from distant lands. The local population worshipped their own gods, had different customs, and spoke various dialects. The Shechemites were governed by Hamor, a local leader whose son Shechem, bearing the same name as the city, occupied a privileged position in the community. In political terms, that region consisted of small city-states, each with its own ruler. There were no great unified empires controlling vast territories, as would occur centuries later. Each city protected its own interests, formed alliances, and warred with neighbors. In this context, Jacob and his family represented a minority group, foreigners without political protection, dependent on the goodwill of local inhabitants. Jacob's family was prosperous in terms of flocks and servants, but vulnerable in political terms. They were in a foreign land without natural allies. Jacob, after years of family conflicts and escapes, sought a period of tranquility. He had legitimately purchased a piece of land from the sons of Hamor and hoped to establish peaceful relations with the local inhabitants. For Jacob's sons, especially the older ones like Simeon and Levi, sons of Leah, just like Dinah, the situation was delicate. They felt the responsibility to protect family interests in foreign territory. The family's honor and the safety of its members depended on them, especially in an environment where they couldn't count on the protection of established laws or alliances. It was in this complex scenario that Dinah, probably a teenager at the time, made the decision that would forever change her family's destiny. One day, perhaps driven by the natural curiosity of her age, perhaps seeking the company of other young women, she decided to go out alone to visit the city of Shechem. A seemingly simple and innocent decision, but one that would trigger a series of tragic events. The day began like any other in Jacob's family camp. The sun rose over the tents scattered across the plains near Shechem, illuminating an already established routine. Men went out to tend the flocks, women prepared food and wove. Children played among the tents. Dinah probably helped with household chores, as she had done hundreds of times before. But something was different that day. Perhaps it was the distant sound of music coming from the city. Perhaps comments about a festival or celebration, or simply the natural desire of a young woman to meet people beyond the family circle. The biblical text simply says, "Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land." Dinah probably informed someone about her intention to visit the city. Perhaps her mother Leah consented, believing that the proximity made the visit safe. Perhaps it was an impulsive decision, made when the older brothers were busy with flocks in distant fields. Either way, she walked alone along the road connecting the family camp to the city of Shechem. The city must have seemed fascinating to a young woman raised in tents and open fields. The narrow streets full of people, the sounds of merchants announcing their products, the smell of spices and food being prepared, the permanent stone buildings, so different from the temporary tents that were her home. Dinah probably observed everything with curious eyes, absorbing the novelties. That's when Shechem, the son of ruler Hamor, spotted Dinah, a privileged young man, accustomed to having what he desired. The biblical text is direct and disturbing in what happens next. When Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. The violence of the act is inescapable. There was no consent. There was no courtship. The Hebrew text uses terms that make clear the nature of the crime. Dinah was the victim of a brutal attack, a trauma that would forever change her life. In an instant, her dreams, her innocence, her social position, everything was violently torn away from her. The most disturbing part is what happens next. After the attack, the text says that Shechem's soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, a strange psychological twist from the aggressor, who now claimed to love his victim. Shechem asked his father, "Get me this young woman as a wife," as if he could erase the violence with a forced marriage. Hamor, his father, instead of punishing his son for the crime committed, decided to negotiate with Jacob. He traveled to the camp to propose not only the marriage between Shechem and Dinah, but a broader alliance between the two peoples. "Make marriages with us," he proposed. "Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions in it." The proposal seemed generous on the surface. It offered complete social integration, economic opportunities, access to lands. For a foreign nomadic group, such benefits would normally be very attractive. Shechem, the son, added, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me, but give me the young woman as a wife." During this entire negotiation, Dinah's voice is absent. No one asks what she wants. No one mentions her trauma or her feelings. She becomes an object of transaction between men, a piece in a political and economic game. When the news reached Jacob's ears, he kept silent until his sons returned from the fields. The text says that Jacob held his peace. This silence has been interpreted in various ways over the centuries. Was he too shocked to react? Was he calculating the best political response? Was he paralyzed by fear, knowing himself vulnerable in a foreign land? The text doesn't clarify. Jacob's sons, however, did not keep silent. When they learned what had happened, they were grieved and very angry, because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. Their fury was both personal and cultural. In the patriarchal society in which they lived, the violation of a family virgin was considered a very serious offense. an attack on collective honor. Instead of completely rejecting the proposal, Jacob's sons devised a meticulous plan. They responded to Hamor and Shechem, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. But on this condition, we will consent if you will become as we are, if every male of you is circumcised." It was an extreme demand. Circumcision was a religious and identity ritual for Jacob's family, a sign of the covenant with their God. To propose that an entire city adopt this practice to permit a marriage was unprecedented. But surprisingly, Hamor and Shechem accepted. Shechem didn't hesitate, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. He and his father persuaded all the men of the city, "These men are at peace with us. Therefore let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let us give them our daughters." They added an economic incentive. "Will not their livestock, their property, and every animal of theirs be ours?" So all who went out of the gate of his city agreed and were circumcised. An entire city of men submitted to a painful procedure, motivated by a mixture of desire for economic integration, possibilities of advantageous marriages, and in Shechem's case, an obsessive fixation with Dinah. On the third day after the circumcision, when the men of Shechem were most vulnerable due to the pain of the procedure, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's full brothers, sons of the same mother, Leah, put their plan into action. The text says, "It came to pass on the third day when they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed all the males." The vengeance was brutal and disproportionate. They not only killed Hamor and Shechem, the main responsible parties, but all the men of the city. After the massacre, they plundered the city. They took their sheep, their oxen, and their donkeys, what was in the city, and what was in the field. They captured all their little ones and their wives, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. An entire city was decimated, men killed, women and children enslaved, properties stolen. The response to a terrible crime against one person transformed into genocide against an entire community. When Jacob learned of the carnage, he confronted his sons. "You have troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me. I shall be destroyed, my household and I." His main concern seemed to be the political consequences of the act, the danger of retaliation from neighboring peoples. Simeon and Levi's response is short but revealing. Should he treat our sister like a harlot? For them the issue was simple. Family honor had been violated, and vengeance was necessary and just. The disproportionate nature of the response didn't seem problematic to them. And Dinah, what happened to her after these tragic events? The biblical text only mentions, "They took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out." After this she disappears from the main narrative. Her voice is never heard. Her feelings are never expressed. Her fate remains unknown, a painful gap in the story. What is rarely discussed about this episode is how it fundamentally altered the trajectory of the 12 tribes of Israel. The disproportionate vengeance executed by Simeon and Levi wasn't an isolated event, forgotten with the passage of time. Its consequences echoed for generations, shaping the destiny of entire tribes. Years later, when Jacob was on his deathbed, he gathered his sons for his final blessings. For most of his sons, he had words of encouragement, promises of prosperity, or specific warnings. But when it came to Simeon and Levi's turn, his words were surprisingly harsh. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. This wasn't a blessing, but a curse. Jacob predicted that these two tribes would be dispersed, without their own unified territory, and indeed, subsequent history confirms this prophecy. The tribe of Simeon received only scattered cities within the territory of Judah, eventually being practically absorbed. The tribe of Levi received no territory at all, becoming the priestly tribe dispersed among all the others. It's fascinating how the crime committed by two individuals determined the destiny of their entire tribes for generations. The excessive violence of two brothers resulted in permanent consequences for their descendants, a powerful lesson about how individual actions can have lasting collective repercussions. Another rarely explored aspect is what might have happened if Jacob's family had accepted the proposal of integration with the Shechemites. The text suggests that Hamor was proposing a complete assimilation between the two peoples. If that merger had occurred, the distinct identity of the children of Israel could have been diluted among the Canaanites. The course of biblical history would have been drastically altered. Some scholars suggest that the conflict reflects broader tensions between nomadic and sedentary lifestyles, between preservation of cultural identity and integration. The violent rejection of the assimilation proposal can be seen as a decisive moment in the formation of Israelite identity as a separate people. Jacob's silence during the initial episode also deserves deeper analysis. Why didn't he act immediately upon learning of the violence against his daughter? Why did he allow his sons to take control of the situation? Some commentators suggest that, as a foreigner in a strange land, he felt politically too vulnerable to confront the local prince. Others propose that he was genuinely undecided about the best response, recognizing the complexity of the situation. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of this story is the systematic silencing of Dinah. Throughout the narrative, she never speaks. We don't hear her cries during the attack. We don't know her feelings about the proposed marriage. We don't know her reaction to her brother's brutal revenge. We know nothing about her life after the trauma. She is the center of the story, but without a voice of her own. This silencing wasn't unusual in ancient narratives, where women frequently appear as properties to be protected or objects of dispute between men. But for modern readers, the absence of Dinah's voice cries out for attention. What would she have said if she could speak? Would she have approved of her brother's revenge? Would she have preferred marriage to Shechem over the carnage that followed? Would she have had other solutions to propose? Later traditions attempted to fill this void. The apocryphal Book of Jubilees suggests that Dinah eventually married her nephew Job, not the Job of the homonymous book, but a descendant of her brother Issachar. Other rabbinic traditions suggest that she may have married her brother Simeon. Still others say that she remained single for the rest of her life. In the absence of canonical texts, these traditions remain speculative. The fate of the women and children of Shechem after the massacre is also rarely discussed. The text mentions they were taken captive. Did they become slaves in Jacob's community? Were they sold to other tribes? Were they eventually freed? The silence about their fate is deafening, especially considering they were innocent victims of disproportionate revenge. Dinah's story has been interpreted in radically different ways throughout the centuries. Some ancient commentators justified the actions of Simeon and Levi as a necessary defense of family honor and ethnic purity. Others, including Jacob himself on his deathbed, condemned the disproportionate nature of the revenge. Contemporary readers frequently focus on the injustice of Dinah's silencing and the secondary victimization of the women and children of Shechem. One of the most surprising readings comes from the way the text itself refers to the initial crime. The narrator says that Shechem had done a disgraceful thing in Israel, not just against Dinah or against Jacob's family, but against Israel. This is one of the first uses of the name Israel to refer to the people, not just the individual, remembering that Jacob received the name Israel after wrestling with a mysterious being. It suggests that an attack on one member of the community was seen as an attack on the entire nascent community, prefiguring later concepts of collective identity.
Finally, it's revealing that this traumatic episode occurs precisely when the family is in transition geographically from nomads to semi-sedentary, politically from a family to a proto-nation, theologically building a distinct identity based on their covenant with God. The event catalyzed a more defined separation between Jacob's descendants and the peoples around them, establishing clearer boundaries at a critical formative moment. To discover more fascinating stories like this, simply subscribe to this channel, where we explore the lesser-known episodes of Scripture, revealing layers of meaning that are rarely discussed in conventional religious circles. Dinah's story echoes through the ages as a disturbing reminder of how violence generates more violence, creating destructive cycles that affect generations. It's not a comfortable narrative with clear heroes and obvious villains. It's a story full of moral gray areas, where victims become aggressors, where the pursuit of justice transforms into excessive vengeance, where the consequences of individual actions extend far beyond the original actors. In contemporary societies, we still face similar questions. How do we respond to acts of violence? When does retaliation become as problematic as the original crime? How do we protect the vulnerable without becoming what we're fighting against? Dinah's story doesn't offer simple answers, but invites deep reflection on justice, proportionality, and consequences. The silencing of Dinah in the narrative also resonates uncomfortably in our current world. How often do victims of violence continue without a voice in discussions about their own fate? How often are narratives constructed around them, but not by them? The absence of Dinah's perspective is a void that cries out to be recognized. The manipulation of religion to justify violence, as seen in the deception of circumcision, also remains sadly relevant. Jacob's sons used a sacred ritual as a military strategy, a profanation of their own belief system. Throughout human history, religious symbols and practices have been repeatedly distorted to justify atrocities. This story serves as a warning about the dangers of instrumentalizing faith for violent ends. Jacob's final words to Simeon and Levi offer a profound insight into the long-term consequences of excessive violence. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. This wasn't just a punishment but also a preventive measure, dispersing those with violent tendencies to avoid concentration of destructive power. There's wisdom in this approach that we can still apply today in systems of governance and distribution of power. Ironically, the tribe of Levi, cursed with dispersal for its violence, eventually found redemption in its priestly role. Those who had wielded swords in fury became the guardians of the law and sacred rituals. There's a profound lesson about transformation and second chances in this evolution from vengeful warriors to ministers of peace. As for Dinah, although her voice was silenced in Scripture, her story continues to speak. She represents all vulnerable people whose lives were defined by traumas they didn't create, but whose spirit remains indomitable. We don't know what happened to Dinah after these events, but we can hope she found some measure of peace and purpose beyond the trauma. In the end, perhaps the most powerful message of this story is about the limitations of vengeance as a response to injustice. The violence against Dinah was terrible, but her brother's response created more innocent victims and consequences that would last generations. Vengeance may seem satisfying in the moment, but rarely brings true healing or resolution. Deep wounds, whether in ancient history or in our modern experience, are rarely healed with more violence. True justice requires more than retribution. It demands recognition, restoration, and eventually reconciliation. Dinah's story remains as a somber mirror in which we can see reflected our own challenges in building more just and compassionate societies. The silence surrounding Dinah in Scripture can be viewed not as a final absence, but as an open space for each generation of readers to consider their own response to the eternal questions of justice, violence, and healing. Her incomplete story invites us to complete it with our own choices about how we respond to injustice in our time. A single young woman went out to meet the women of a foreign land. an act of curiosity and openness that ended in tragedy, but through that tragedy, profound lessons emerge for those willing to listen to the silences and question easy justifications for violence. In the words of the prophet Micah, who would come centuries later, "He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God."